Welcome back to Little Paws Homestead. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a garden tour and we've had a lot of heat and a lot of rain, so the garden is looking quite a bit different. Today I figured that we would start in the other side of our yard where behind me you can see our apple trees that are doing very well, and then we also have the strawberry and asparagus patch here, so we will start with that. The strawberry and asparagus patch is looking great. As you can see, we even have some like newer asparagus. There's like 5 there. So that was obviously a really nice and healthy crown. We haven't harvested too much from here because we weren't intending to this year. So strawberries and asparagus will come back year after year, but they need a couple years to get established. So we are watching the strawberries. They're putting off runners, which I'll show you in a minute, and the asparagus we're just letting grow and get big. And some of the ones that I bought have seeds, so we're just letting those like fall over and be in the bed, and then they can just keep establishing new plants. Now asparagus does spread kind of through their root system, so even though all of our asparagus doesn't have seeds, we'll still continue to get new asparagus every year. And we'll probably be able to harvest a little bit of it next year. And then the following year, we should be able to harvest like normal from a patch this size. We have 2 extremely giant asparaguses, and this fence also needs to be redone because we had a windstorm that took it down. And those are the purple asparagus variety. They're the only purple asparagus that came up this year. I think I planted 5 crowns, but those ones are doing really well, so we're just gonna leave them. And then most of our little asparagus where I planted crowns has 2 or 3 coming out of it. For this garden, we just tilled it and added the mushroom compost that I bought for this year and then planted just right into it. So we are still, as you can see, dealing with lots and lots of weeds, but we're working on staying on top of them. And then we mulch every time Scott cuts the grass. He dumps it in the bed, as you can see in the middle there. He dumps it in there. We let it dry out for a couple days, and then we put it around the plants. So we'll be battling weeds here for, well, probably forever. But that's okay, because everything is still looking great. Like this asparagus patch where there's at least 5, maybe more. So this is what we call a runner that I was talking about. This is like the parent plant, and we've got some runners that are coming off and rooting, and that's how strawberries spread. So we will have to cover all of these for winter with either straw or leaves, probably leaf mulch if I can get enough leaves for it, and then they should be good until the spring. Here's another one that has created another strawberry plant off of this parent plant. And then we have this asparagus that kind of just went a little wonky. But we're just leaving all of them and letting them do their thing for this year. This here is, I find interesting. I just threw in some kale seeds and a broccoli plant in here in the spring. And this is where we had spinach growing over winter, so we put it in the fall and then just left it closed all winter so that it didn't freeze, and it started growing again, and we had fresh spinach in like April. So in the spring when we had a fairly cool wet spring, so I put kale seeds in, and then kind of around the time that they started doing things, it got extremely hot. And the problem with having an open cold frame in the dog yard is that it got dug up by Patch. So Patch dug this whole thing up, and apparently the kale, as you can see here, just kind of kept growing. And we do have a broccoli that I unfortunately missed, but that's okay. It'll go into dog veggies. So I haven't watered this. I haven't really done much to it, and it's just kind of amazing what came out of it. Obviously the bugs have also found it, but a couple days ago it was looking really good. So now we're in what we call the farm yard, and I need to go pull some weeds and give them to the ducks that you can probably hear, or that's all you're going to be able to hear for the entire tour. So as you can hear, they heard me in the garden. So I forgot to give them their weeds this morning, and they're clearly telling me that that was the case. Every time I'm in the garden, whether it's just to do like a quick watering, check on birds, anything like that, they all come over to the gate because they want weeds like these. But now they would like me to leave, so I'm gonna go and continue the farm tour. So these two beds here were mainly our spring crops. So we had a lot of bok choy in them and peas. All of those things have kind of died off, although they did stick around longer than I expected. So I have a bunch of kohlrabi here that I need to harvest, and that will let the basil on the other side of it, which we have in 3 different spots. That'll let that thrive, as well as the rosemary. On this side of the trellis, I do have beans started. I just pulled out the peas from this side, and so hopefully these beans will start climbing soon. And then we'll do the same thing on this side. These beans, I'm getting like 2 or 3 beans every once in a while from these plants, but they're starting to die back. So we even have a cucumber that came up. So I planted cucumber here for a second wave, even though our first wave hasn't even really started. I'm hoping that this one will do a little bit better because our first one seemed to be struggling in the heat. In between our first and second row of beds, I have potatoes here that are in grow bags. We have potatoes in a couple different places, and these ones seem to be doing the best. So I think we're going to be growing potatoes probably exclusively in grow bags next year. And then we also have some basil that needs to be harvested. So we've got cinnamon basil, purple opal basil, and I believe that this one is lemon basil. Behind it, we've got our onions. I kind of unknowingly planted them in clusters, and then was watching some videos yesterday about how it causes them to grow really nice roots, and that seems to be happening here. If you can see them. So they seem to be doing well. They're still nice and hard, so they're growing, and they'll keep growing. Behind them, we've got leeks and some bolting spinach. And then on this trellis, these two are slightly, I can't figure out what's going on. So I have planted red noodle beans on both sides, and on this side, the red noodle beans are just taking off. And on this side, they don't even have runners yet. So I don't really know what's going on, but I also have cucumbers on this side. As you can see, there's one right here. And these ones are climbing nicely. We actually have a cluster of 3 little cucumbers right there. So hopefully this side will just kind of get taken over with cucumbers, and that's totally fine with me. So this is our sad and forgotten broccoli and cauliflower bed, and I've left all of this in just because I need to pull it out and run it through the grinder for dog veggies, and I haven't got there yet. I'm hoping to do that this week. And then I believe I'm going to put kale or onions in this bed for fall. I haven't quite decided yet. This next bed behind me is probably my favorite one in the garden this year. I've always had the hardest time growing peppers, and all of the ones except for the jalapenos in this bed I started from seed, and they're all flowering, and we should get a decent pepper harvest this year. This is probably my favorite pepper plant that I'm growing. It doesn't actually have peppers on it yet, although I think I saw flowers. This is the fish pepper, and I just love the leaves on it. So the other day I was looking at a picture from the 26th of June, so just under a month ago, and these plants were maybe a third of this size. So this is a jalapeno plant, and it is just loaded with flowers. These 3, so this one, this plant here, and this plant here are all sweet pepper plants, and They also have tons of flowers on them. I believe this one is a habanada plant, which I'm excited about because I really like habanero, but sometimes they're just too spicy for me. And it is a little bit slower because hot peppers generally are, and it is just huge. And then in between these two plants, we have a cinnamon basil plant, which has just kind of taken off. So behind the pepper bed, we have the half tomato and half peppers. So on this side, we have a Dr. Witchy's yellow tomato plant, a pineapple tomato plant, which just is getting some giant fruit on it. And this is a great white, which also has some monster fruit. So they're all doing well. They are getting some leaf curl because they need water. We got some rain, but not quite enough. It rained really, really hard, but not for very long. So it didn't get a chance to soak up into the beds. We also have an extra, I think this is a pineapple tomato plant that has some fruit on it and it's doing well. It needs to be tied up again. And I need to remember to take the suckers off of it. Down on this side, we have a San Marzano that has some fruit underneath doing well. And I think this is a black Hungarian hot pepper that has tons and tons of flowers and even a baby pepper. I do have to move this pepper bed because this is the vine from the blue Hubbard squash and it keeps trying to like latch on to the tomatoes and the pepper, the stems that are just right there. So they're gonna have to move later today. So this bed here is all of our beans, and we had an extremely slow start to beans this year and had a hard time getting them to germinate. I don't know, I think birds may have been eating them, but they're finally taking off. This bed's also fairly weedy because I planted beans at so many different times that I couldn't mulch it properly because I still had baby bean plants coming up. So it's finally looking good and we'll hopefully get mulched probably next week. And these are all the bush beans, which are just starting to take off. But as you can see, we still have some baby plants that like have just poked through. And so that's why we were waiting on mulching. Because there's probably also some, like in this area that's a little bit patchy, where we have some baby plants waiting to come up. So behind me is what I've been lovingly referring to as the jungle. The squash plants have been doing fantastic this year. They're starting to show a little bit of stress with the humidity that we've been having and the rain. So I have to pull off some like crinkly leaves, but other than that, they're doing great. Our melons, as you can see, our trellises are bare. Our melons are slowly starting to grow. Hopefully they will take over soon, because if not, the climbing squash is just gonna overrun everything. So on this side we have Kajari melons, which as you can see, they got some bug damage. They're starting to climb a little bit. I don't know how well they're going to do, and the Hubbard squash behind them is threatening to take over. On this side, the spaghetti squash did take over. We have like one Kajari melon plant that I think is just going to end up getting it's not going to get the sun or anything else it needs, because I planted a lot of spaghetti squash because we really, really like it. So we have some spaghetti squash growing, which is super exciting. There's one under there and a baby one there. I think there's a little tiny baby one up here. And there's one down here. So there's a bunch, and this is kind of just taking over all over the place. Behind the spaghetti squash, we've got this one lonely little acorn squash plant. My first one's got eaten, so hopefully this one will still have time to produce. And then we've got, I believe this side is the Tigger melons, which they're doing okay. They're starting to climb a little bit. And then this one was a Minnesota midget melon, I believe, and it's also starting to climb. It did get bug damage, and the spaghetti squash is starting to take over. So we'll see what happens there. The zucchini has been doing wonderfully. I've already dehydrated a whole dehydrator load, and this one is going to have to come in. I really like the gray zucchini. It's been growing really nicely. This is not powdery mildew. This is just the gray zucchini plant, but I have to do some pruning underneath because some of the plant leaves are starting to yellow, and I just don't want the plant to be putting energy into those leaves anymore. This side is the Black Beauty zucchini, as well as an okra plant. The okra is getting a little bit shaded by the zucchini plants that took off this year, and we do have a giant zucchini that needs to come in. This is a combination of, I planted a cheese pumpkin, which is kind of at the back there, and I planted delicata squash for winter storage, and we're starting to get, I think I found some this morning. Like that one's not going to amount to anything. I don't know if you can even see it. Yeah, that one's just not pollinated properly. But let's see if I can find any. There's lots of flowers. I'm also not sure if this is pumpkin or delicata vine. So we'll see. Oh, there's one down in here that seems to be doing well. So that's also exciting. Oh, and there's another one over here. There's a lot hanging out in the grass, it looks like. The comfrey plant got a little bit angry with the heat, but is now doing better again. So I might cut some more off to dehydrate. These nasturtiums stayed pretty small, but now they're flowering despite the heat. I thought they didn't really like the heat, but they seem to be doing well. These are all of our leeks, which we planted in cinder blocks because I bought too many, and they're doing really well. Our quail are currently here. We move them every couple days around the pathways in the garden, and so they happen to be here right now. So we're gonna have to go around to show you the rest of the garden. This is another pepper bed. It's not doing quite as well as the first one. Again, I don't know why. This is my first year with these raised beds, and I am definitely taking note of what's doing well where. But we have, this pepper's actually doubled since yesterday. So this is the black Hungarian hot pepper, and it's the first pepper we're actually getting this year. Next, we have this bed, which has gone a little bit wild. You can see at the bottom that I bought a soaker hose for it because the tomatillos were getting really, really angry with all the heat. I didn't realize how big these plants could get, and they're just completely loaded. None of them are even close to being ready yet. Tomatillos grow their husks before their fruit, so you can see as I squish it, the fruit is really, really small. But they're doing really well. They're also taking over. So I also have tomatoes in this bed. These are a yellow stuffer tomato, which are doing nicely. This is a branch from, this is a striped Roma tomato that's kind of getting dwarfed because we have tomatillo that has come all the way over here. So there's also a San Marzano pepper over here and a gobstopper pepper. This is the only cherry tomato I actually grew because for the most part we prefer tomatoes in things rather than raw tomatoes. So this bed's gone a little bit crazy, but we're just letting it because we really like green salsa, so I will take all of the tomatillos I can get. The berry bushes behind me are all doing well. I did get another blueberry bush today when I was out and about, so that'll get added behind me. As you can see, we weeded it a couple weeks ago and then got a ton of rain, so there's a bunch of weeds again, and we need to spend some time doing it, pulling all those weeds out. Right now we're just pulling them out daily and giving handfuls of them to the ducks, and that seems to be working pretty well. But for the most part, not much is going on back there. Everything's just getting established this year, and we'll hopefully get berries in a couple years. This raised bed was the first one I ever built, and it was never meant to be anything permanent. Last year I, at the last second, decided I wanted to plant potatoes and then garlic, and so I just kind of threw pallets together with some weed fabric to keep the soil in, and it's holding together. So we pulled the garlic out, which I think you saw last video or the video before, and we have enough time. We have about 74 days left in our growing season. So I've put rattlesnake bush beans, I think that's what they're called, here, which will grow. They have about a 55-day to maturity, so we'll get like about 20 days worth of beans if that frost comes on October 4th, which is our estimated first frost. So I'm excited to be able to use this bed again, and then once we pull beans out, once they get killed off by frost, we'll be putting garlic back in here. So this is another potato bed that's doing fairly well. They do need to be hilled again, but we're just gonna let them keep growing. We planted 2 of these raised beds of potatoes, and still the grow bags are outperforming them, but these ones are doing pretty well. These next beds are they were our root vegetable beds, which didn't do super well this spring, which I think is because I planted all the root vegetables, then we got a frost way later than we usually do, and then it got really, really hot. So root vegetables typically don't like tons of heat, and so they didn't do super well, but I pulled out what I could, and the ducks got the rest, and the dogs are actually getting some of the beet tops that grew. And then I still have these ones that I had planted after. So these first like thirds of the bed I planted before the first frost, and then these I planted after. And because it was so hot, I have really spotty germination, but I'm leaving the plants in that are there, and we'll see what happens with them. I will be planting more root vegetables in those beds soon. I just started beets in the house. I want to see how they transplant, and I am going to be trying beets with the multi-sowing method that I was learning about last night from Charles Downing. And the idea is that you plant multiple root vegetables together and they grow outward, instead of, a lot of people will think they crowd each other out. But if you leave enough space around the like clump of root vegetables that you have, they should still perform really well. And so I'm going to see how that goes. So I have those started in the house. It's still way too hot for carrots to germinate, so carrots we'll probably put in like mid-August when it started to cool down a little bit again. So for now, I'm going to plant Swiss chard and mustard, because both of those 2 things do okay in the heat, just so that I'm not leaving these beds bare, because if you leave them bare, then Mother Nature will put something there, and I'd rather put something there that I want to eat. So this garlic bed on the left used to be right up against the tomatoes, and after we pulled the garlic out, we moved it over so that we have a pathway here now. And these tomatoes are looking a little bit like they would like some water, so they're also going to get the soaker hose later on today. But these tomatoes I'm super excited about. These are the peach tomatoes, and they get fuzzy and yellow, or sorry, orange. So I've got a little cluster of them down here, and another cluster of them over here, and then another one up here. So these plants are doing very well. They're, as you can see, extremely tall, which is very exciting. I've never had a garden do this well, but it's amazing to me to see the tomatoes just getting huge. These ones, I believe these are, I don't actually remember. I think these are the chocolate striped tomatoes. That's what these are. And they're doing very well, as you can see. If we look at the bottom of our tomatoes, some of them, which I have to pull them off, have this brown on the bottom. I've just been pulling that off, and some of them are doing fine, as you can see. These bigger ones underneath are doing great. I don't particularly think that the brown that I'm seeing underneath is blossom end rot, because this is the first year with this soil, so it shouldn't be depleted. And I did plant all of the tomatoes with some pulverized lime, which should have helped with the calcium. What I do think happened is we had a couple weeks of 0 rain, super hot, and then we got just downpoured on a couple times, like one right after the other. So I think it was just an overwatering that caused the bottom of those tomatoes to go brown. It's not fun to see it. I would prefer, obviously, that they're not like that, but the chickens will still eat them. So I've been cutting them off to allow the plant to focus on ripening the rest of its fruit, and the chickens will then turn those tomatoes into compost for us. So I wasn't entirely sure where to put this plant. It is a loofah, and everything I've read about loofahs or watched said that loofah likes to take over. So when the plant started putting out runners, I was like, oh, well, now I have to find some place to put this. And I didn't want to put anything along this pallet, which is enclosing our ducks, because I was worried they would eat all of it. But then because the loofah plant is such a prolific and fast grower and wants to take over everything, I'm not really worried about them eating like the couple leaves that they'll be able to get to. And I am hoping that it's going to just kind of take over this entire trellis that I put up, so that it'll also give them some nice shade, because they have a little bit of shade from these big trees in their yard, but just any extra shade as we're going into the hottest part of summer, I'm sure they'll appreciate. Behind the tomato wall, I have this really pretty chocolate sunflower that just opened, which I'm super excited about. But then also is where I put the kale. The intention of putting the kale behind the tomatoes was that the kale would get shaded and might not bolt as fast. None of it's bolted. It has gotten pretty bitter. We're still using it cooked in eggs, like cooked with eggs and things like that. And I'm just leaving it for as long as possible. This scarlet kale, these two plants, have done the best and have resisted a lot of the bug damage that our dazzling kale got. So I'm hoping that this actually will bolt soon so that I can save seeds from it. And then we will rip this kale out and put new kale in for the cooler temperatures that are coming, you know, in about a month or so. So this is probably about the last bed I'll be able to show, because it is starting to rain and there isn't actually that much left. And it's another surprising one. I threw a couple eggplants in here, not knowing how big plants got, which is kind of the theme of this year, and they're doing really well. So down here, we've got a couple eggplants hiding back there. And, oh, hello, little ladybug. Please go eat all of the terrible things in my garden. And there's another eggplant here. And another one down here. So these ones, from what I've read, are very prolific plants. And if you can see all the flowers on them, I would tend to agree. Also in this bed, I have oregano, which something is eating and I don't know what it is. And I'm hoping that oregano, it just kind of explodes and reseeds and comes back here next year. And then we have this slow bolt cilantro, which is another one of those things I'm extremely surprised about, because everything I know about cilantro, it bolts really fast. That seems to not be the case with this one. It's doing extremely well. Hopefully it will hang on long enough, because Scott has requested some cilantro salsa that I'll have to make him. I am one of those people who do not like cilantro at all. So we will be doing, if the cilantro holds on long enough, we will be doing some salsa with cilantro and some salsa without cilantro. And we have, peppers are all doing really well. Tomatoes are loaded. And so hopefully this guy will just hang on a little bit longer so that I can get some of that done this summer before it goes to seed. On the other side of this eggplant bed, I have, this is also a habanada plant, and it is looking great. Still doesn't have flowers on it, but those hotter peppers, even though it's not a hot pepper, it stems from a hot pepper, those ones take a really long time to get going. And then I have another cinnamon basil plant. I bought a 4-pack of these and it feels like they're everywhere in the garden, but it's just because I stuck them in all my open spaces. And then this last plant is a Casper eggplant, which I just like things that look weird, as you can probably tell. And so white eggplant seemed really cool. This one is definitely slower than the purple striped eggplant that I have behind it. But if you look, there's like little eggplants. I saw one, where was it? There's little eggplants kind of everywhere. So hopefully this plant will just be loaded soon. And then I have to find a bunch of stuff to do with eggplant. So the rain is still holding off for a couple minutes, so I wanted to show you this kind of disaster of a bed. So this is another one I just threw together this year. Someone gave me some walking onions and I didn't want them taking over if I just put them in the ground. So I just turned a pallet over, nailed some boards to the side and put some soil in. And I didn't expect the onions to do anything this year, and they haven't. This is actually, I believe it's lamb's quarter. It's everywhere across over this property. It can be used like spinach. We just never have. We tend to just feed it to the ducks because they also love it. But it took over, but I didn't want to be disturbing the onions that I'm hoping are still alive under there. So I'm leaving it because that stuff does get really big root systems, so it's gonna stay. But in front of it, I planted some sunflowers, and there is a cucumber beetle on them. We do have we have a lot of cucumber beetles, but the sunflowers are looking beautiful, as are the bachelor buttons. These are actually edible flowers, which I haven't tried yet, but have been meaning to now that they are finally blooming. And kind of down in the middle of the weeds, we have more of the nasturtiums, which are doing nicely despite the heat. And then on this side, we have a lot more sunflowers that haven't quite opened yet, but it looks like they're going to any day now. Last but not least, we have this fire pit. So this was our old fire pit before Scott built a new one, and I just saw it as a raised bed, so I threw it over here and put some soil into it. And these seeds here are artichokes, which won't probably get big enough to do anything this year, but artichokes are perennial, so I'm hoping that this will just be the artichoke planter from now on. It's, again, not really something that we eat, but they have gorgeous flowers that the pollinators love, so it can just hang out here. And then all of these little ones that are all around the sides are zinnias that I planted because I knew that the artichokes weren't going to do too much this year. But now that the rain seems to be holding off, I'm going to actually go get some of that Swiss chard and mustard planted so that those can do their thing and start germinating. And then that's probably it for the garden today, because it's supposed to get really, really hot as the day goes on, and I don't really want to be out here during that, and neither do the dogs. The dogs found me out, and so now it's time to go play fetch with them before I do anything else. If you would like to see how the garden matures and what we get up to for the fall garden, then be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you get notified every time we post a video. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.